All right, in this video, we're going to go over startup and shutdown procedures straight out of PMC's manual. It's going to be a pretty detailed format, but we're going to go ahead and begin with the hydraulic oil. So down here below, you see we have a hydraulic oil sight gauge. We want that to be about halfway to 3/4 of the way full. We want to leave some headspace in there. Now it's important to do maintenance on that and replace the hydraulic oil once a year, and you can find acceptable oils in your manual. All right, the next step, we're going to talk about drum storage. It's important to keep the materials in ideal temperature range. We don't want it to get down to freezing or extreme heat. So ideally, we want to keep it around the 60° Fahrenheit mark. If you don't have heated floors like we do, you can use band heaters, base heaters, or space heaters, or just a controlled environment to get it up to that temperature before use. Next, we're going to go over our Y screen. It's important that we change it and check it every drum change to make sure we don't have any buildup in that screen. If we do end up getting a buildup, what can happen is our inlet pressure gauge will be hindered by it. We won't have enough pressure to feed the machine. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over how to remove that screen and clean it. Next, we're going to clean our Y screen. So to do that, we want to remove this cap. It's threaded on. Before we do so, we want to make sure that our inlet pressure gauge is reading 0. We don't want this under pressure when we do this. So now that I know where I don't have any pressure in this portion of the system, I'm going to go ahead and remove this screw. So I'm going to use a big adjustable wrench to kind of loosen it up. Once I break it loose, kind of unthread it by hand. Get a bucket underneath in case it does drip. And there is our cap. I'm going to set that down here. And we have our screen and the spring that kind of holds its shape. So we want to make sure we clean, make sure the inside is clean and the outside. It does filter from the inside out. So once we know this is clean, you can use acetone to clean it off, put the spring back in. And then with our cap, we'll go ahead and make sure it sits in there. We also have a gasket here on that. We'll slide it all back in and we'll begin to tighten it by hand. Then we'll get our wrench to make sure that we have it on there tight. We don't want it to leak. All right, there we go. All right, next we're going to talk about our transfer pumps and the flow of our materials. So in each drum we have a transfer pump. These are 2-to-1. So every PSI of pressure that you feed it, it'll produce 2 PSI of fluid pressure. So on your regulator, you want to set to about 100 PSI for these pumps to feed your machine. Now every day you should use air-to-oil or white lithium grease on that airline to make sure that it keeps that pump a long life. And from there we'll follow our fluid path, which starts here at the transfer pump. It'll pull up material, feed it through our feed hoses, through our Y screen to collect any debris that they may be. And then through your pressure gauge, that we can use that to see what our inlet pressure is reading, and then through a temperature gauge to know what our material pressure is going into the system. Through that check ball, it'll make its way through the pump to heater hose, which is right here coming out of the top of this pump. And then once it gets to the heater, which is actually behind this plate, it'll come out of your line set and it'll go all the way down the line set to your gun. All right, next we're going to talk about B-side agitation and using pigment if you need it. So for the B-side, we need to mix 1 minute per gallon. So if it's a full drum, it'll have to be about a 50-minute agitation on it. And if you need to add pigment to it, if your drum is neutral or clear, you can add a color to it. But on a full drum, you'll use 1 full gallon of pigment. So you pour it in while you're agitating it, again like 1 minute per gallon. Let it get agitated in there. We'll go ahead and let this process go. So we'll use our air motor to let the agitator work. We'll turn it on. And then at this point, we'll attach our transfer pump's airline. We'll make sure our transfer pump is open. We'll also make sure that the A-side transfer pump valve is open and the valves on the side of the machine are also open. Once we do that, we're ready for the next step. All right, next we're going to talk about our actual startup procedure on the machine itself. So first we're going to start with the main power. This will allow power to flow throughout the machine. Next, we're going to do control power. This will activate the 24-volt board. That should give us all our controls here to come up. Once everything has come up, you should see the current reading and the set reading. To adjust that set reading, you can use the arrows here up and down to raise or lower that set temp. And then that larger red number is the current reading. I'm going to turn our hose heat on. And with this should begin to be heating the line set. It gets its reading from the thermocouple in the line is actually connected to this, so it knows what the hose heat is reading. And then once that gets up to temp, we'll turn on our A&R heaters, which these work in the same way, except for they get a reading instead of in the hose, they get it from the actual heater, which is behind this plate here. And then once they all come up to temp, we can go ahead and turn our motor power on, and we'll put our pump into normal. Next, we're going to talk about the system's 5 safeties. The first ones I'm going to talk about are the 2 around back of the machine, the overpressure and the overtemperature. Now the overpressure switch will shut off your hydraulic pressure whenever it exceeds 3200 psi. And the overtemperature, once you exceed 200 degrees Fahrenheit, it'll shut down the electrical on this machine. Here on the front part of the machine, we have 3 safeties: our countdown counter, our pressure balance control, and the emergency stop. Now the emergency stop is pretty straightforward. Once that's pushed in, it'll shut down the electrical and the hydraulic portion of this machine. On the pressure balance control, we have it set to 500 psi. I wouldn't recommend setting it any higher than that. Once the outlet pressure gauges are more than that set amount apart, it will shut off your hydraulic pressure gauge, and this light will illuminate red, meaning that you're more than 500 psi apart, or whatever your set point is. At that point, it'd be a good time to check your gun screen, your mix chamber, just do a little bit of troubleshooting from there. And then the other safety is our countdown counter, which is this one right here in the middle. To get that to illuminate, we'll turn on, and right now it is set for 5,500 strokes is what that's set at. So every 55 strokes that this pump line does, that is 1 total gallon of material that you've used. Half a gallon of A and a half a gallon of B. Since these drums aren't completely full, they're probably about 52, 53 gallons in each of these drums. For easy math, I estimate about 100 total gallons of material you'll be able to spray. So that times 55 is 5,500. So while you're spraying, that 5,500 number will count down. Once it gets to 0, it'll shut down your hydraulics. That is a safety to allow you never to be able to suck in any air or run out of material in the middle of a project without having to swap out your drums. Now, if that does go and you realize you still have a little material left, you can just temporarily turn this off, continue working. Then once you're putting a new set in there, to reset it, there's a reset button right here. You push it and it should start back up at the 5,500 mark. All right, now that we're finished spraying for the day, we're going to put this machine in the retract position. The point of putting this into retract is we actually let the whole pump line shift all the way to the retract position, allowing this pump shaft to be contained inside of this block, keeping it from drying out or anything happening to it, because whereas the B side, it won't dry out or crystallize, the A side can. So the point of retract is not only to bleed off our pressures, but also contain that pump shaft in this portion of the pump. So we'll put it in retract, and then now I'm going to bleed off the pressures with my spray gun, getting my pressures down to about 500 psi. All right, at this point, I'm going to close the valves on my spray gun. I'm going to put this in the vise. Then using my pen vise, I'm going to drill out the tip of my gun. And then the smaller bit for the outer, smaller holes. Then while the air is still on, I'm going to go ahead and grease it. Just give it a couple pumps of grease. And then we can shut off our air. And then from here, we'll shut down the rest of our machine. I'll start by doing motor power. Now I'll shut off the hose heater, the R heater, the A heat. I'll go ahead and turn our control power off. And then our main power. Then from here, I'll make sure all of our valves are closed on our transfer pumps and on the inlet side. And that will conclude our shutdown.